What is my life calling? Now, by far, in well over 30 years of ministry, this has been the most asked question of me as a pastor. People will come and ask, sometimes during prayer time, sometimes during the course of the week, email me, Pastor, I love God. I want to do what God's called me to do. How can I know what my life calling is? And how do I know what my purpose is, what I'm supposed to be doing with my life? And so we want to bring some clarity to that today. We want to help you walk away from here understanding what your life calling is. I had read an article recently and it posted some questions that are supposed to help you with what your purpose is or your calling is. And so I just want to clip through them and let you think about them for yourself. The first question was, if money were no issue, what would you do with your time? Second question, what do you love to do and what do you hate to do? Third question was, what gives you energy? Of course, what drains energy from you? What takes your life kind of away? Number 4 was, what do you want to change, shape, or leave better than you found it? All right? Not a bad question. What segment of population are you drawn to help? And then finally, what do you want to experience, witness, and learn? This was a very good article, but it has nothing to do with finding your life calling. And if you have been on this, then it's not a bad track to be on, but it's really more about self-help. It's more about kind of zeroing in on where you are in the moment with your job and your opportunities that are in front of you and that kind of thing. What we're going to talk about today is much different than this. So I want to bring some clarity to that original question. What is my life's calling? Now, I hope you're taking notes this morning. All right, if you're not, quickly scurry around and act like you're taking notes, okay? On your phone, with a pen or whatever. Now, why do we want you to take notes? Number 1, it makes me feel important. That's not it at all. There are 2 reasons that we want you to take notes, okay? Every time that we come together and wherever you go to hear God's word. Because number 1, the message has been prepared with you in mind, and God visited in these occasions to prepare our hearts as ministers to share with you what He wants you to hear today. And so this is for you, and it's important when things are for us that we take notes, because the second primary reason we want you to take notes is you're going to remember much more when you write things down, when you take notes, than you would remember otherwise if you did not. So this is a helper for you to remember the things that we're talking about. And this is a vital, vital thing that we're talking about today. It's so important. So I want to encourage you to take notes. And if you are, then write this down. This is the first important thing that you need to understand about your life calling. My life calling is to be a bivocational minister of Jesus. My life calling is to be a bivocational minister of Jesus. And you're sitting there going, what in the world is that? Okay? So here's what that means. It doesn't matter if you're a bank teller. It doesn't matter if you are a loan processor, if you're a retail manager, a software engineer, an IT guy, a teacher, a police officer, a small business owner, a construction specialist, a recruiter, a baker, or a candlestick maker, right? It doesn't matter. Whatever you do, you are doing it for 2 reasons. Here at Grace Place, we say to love God and to love people, right? So you're doing what you do for 2 reasons: to honor God and to help others. Now, in our opening passage, we're going to walk through this, and this will help give us some clarity toward what we're talking about in terms of your life calling. Because Paul just spells out his life calling right here in Romans chapter 1, verse 1. He said, Paul, a servant. Now, other passages used bond servant. So we're going to come back and visit what that means in just a moment. A servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle and set apart for the gospel of God. Now, notice that how Paul identifies himself here. He says he is a bond servant of Jesus, called to be an apostle, set apart for the gospel of God. Okay, so that's important. That third point that we're going to be covering and talking about throughout this message is really your life calling, is really your purpose, is really what you're supposed to be doing with your time, your talent, your treasure, and your energies, okay? Now, in ancient Israel, looking back at the first point where Paul said, I was a bond servant. In ancient Israel, if you went into debt, if you borrowed from another, you were a Jew and you borrowed from another Jew, and, you were in debt to them and you owed them money, for, whatever you had purchased, a home, some land, whatever it was, then you were allowed, if you were unable to pay that back, to become a bond servant. And that was a servant who would work in their household to work off your debt. So you were allowed to do that, and it was different from, other countries' types of slavery and things like that. It was more about just earning back what you had borrowed. So you might work in the fields, and you might work in the household, you might work wherever, but you're doing it to work off your debt, the debt that you owe, the loan that you owe. And so they were allowed to do that, and they were called bond servants. And so what happened was that every seventh year, God said that would be the year of Jubilee. And the year of Jubilee would be the year that those debts among Israelites would be forgiven. And they are no longer in debt. So if you owed a lot, then you were forgiven. If you owed a little, it was forgiven in the year of Jubilee. But what would happen sometimes is that they had, since this was not slavery, and their situation was really often very good and better than maybe when they lived by themselves and were trying to make life happen, that many of them became then servants, of love. They just wanted to stay because they were treated fair, they were treated right, they had a job, an occupation, something to do. And so they decided on their own that, you know what, my debt's forgiven, but if you will have me, I would like to stay here and be a part of that. And this is how Paul begins describing himself. He says, I am a bond servant of love. My debt has been forgiven by my master, but I remain with my master as his servant. And that is the first thing of identity about me. I want to be with him, even though he's forgiven my debt. I'm not running away and doing my own thing now. I want to be with him. I want to be in his presence. I want to be around him. I enjoy being with him. And then Paul says, I am called to be an apostle. And this is what is our life vocation, or our positions or titles that we might have. And those can change. We'll take a look at in a moment. But this is our vocation, our title at work, and the kind of thing that we do. And that's what Paul said. I was designed to do this. And so Paul says, this is who I am. I'm an apostle. And God made me this way, and I was all my gifts and talents and things like that, they fit right into this. This is who I am supposed to be. And so this is what I'm supposed to be doing with my life, and it's great, and I enjoy it. And then he says, but Paul says, I have been set apart for the gospel of God. In other words, I am called to be a minister of Jesus. I am called to be a minister of Jesus, to share Jesus with everyone around me, to make him real and understood. Now, if you're still not clear on what your calling is after we've walked through what Paul says, that's okay, because now we're going to walk through that second section of scriptures that we read, and we're going to look at what your life calling is not. Because sometimes it gets clearer when you know what your life calling is not, along with what your life calling is, right? So 2 things that your life calling is not. First of all, your life calling is not your position. You remember Paul talked about, he was the apostle, so your life calling is not your position, what you are doing for work, for livelihood, as a vocation, okay? Let's read through this passage, or just sections of it here that Vanessa read for earlier. Jesse had 7 sons. They all passed before Samuel, who's going to be anointing the new king. God had sent him there, and Israel's new king, and he said, you're going to find him in the household of Jesse. And he has all these guys. Well, he could have, I think probably there were some of these sons that were pretty stellar looking, guys and broad-shouldered and beefy guys. Like, this must be him. This must be. And everyone God had rejected said, no, that's not him. And finally it comes down and he says, do you have any more? And he says, yes, I've got one out in the field. He's my youngest. It was David. And so he says, we'll bring him in. We won't sit down and eat until he comes. And when he came, then as we read in this story, God said, this is the one, anoint him, okay? Anoint him to be king. If David's young, he gets anointed to be king, right? Now, in the biblical narratives, what's always interesting, is when God talks in sense of the calling, it's kind of unfair, God, that you just big picture the whole thing on us, right? There's no detail, all right? And we probably wouldn't make the journey sometimes if God gave us all the details, but he big pictures it, and we're all excited about big picture, right? King! We can all get excited about king, And as an example of that, Joseph, was given the big picture, right? Joseph said, in a dream as a young man, he saw everybody bowing to him. Hey, I'm going to be ruling. That's awesome. I'm so excited about that. I might even tell some of my friends that I'm going to be a ruler. But he did not understand the details of that on the way to the throne, you get to be thrown in the pit, sold into slavery, imprisoned, right, wrongfully, and then make your way out and get to the throne. Man, how many of us would sign up for that one, right? So just God, catch me on the end of that, all right? On the part where I just go to the throne. That's the best part. Let's just leapfrog past all the rest of it. But God big pictures us on it, and the same thing with David. David got big picture, but when we realize it and we read through what was happening with David, between the time that he was anointed and God said, you're going to be the king, here's the kind of things that David was doing with his life. He was a shepherd. Not very kingly. He was a musician. To the king. So inside the palace, but not the king. All right, he was a warrior. There are times he's probably out there thinking, I could get killed and never be the king. He was a husband, he was a father, and finally he was a king. The point is, there are seasons of preparation for our life that we go through, but don't get caught up in a title. You might do a lot of different things in your life, but that's not your life calling, right? You see, David was called to be a worshiper of the living God. Yes. David was called, and as Dane so aptly talked about it today, we think that God's calling, going to set us up so that everybody can know our name. And he's setting us up so everybody can know his name, right? And that's exactly what God was doing through David. That's exactly what he wants to do through all of our lives. He wants to be glorified. It's what John said, I must decrease because he's got to increase. My life calling is about making him big and known and magnified in all the world. Everybody needs to know Jesus. Everybody doesn't need to know me, right? So Paul said, my destination is sealed by God, and the call is on my life. But along the life's journey, I'm always going to be a minister of Jesus. The second thing that your calling is not, if you're taking notes today, your calling, or your life calling, thank you, Jake, is not your provision. Your life calling. Boy, you can even hear me swallow, can't you? Sorry. Your life calling is not your provision. I have heard this said hundreds of times. If I lose this job, I don't know what I'm going to do. If I can't make it in this career, I don't know what I'm going to do. Really? Your life calling is not your provision. And here's the passage that we need to listen to out of Psalms chapter 81. Listen to me, O my people, while I give you stern warnings. O Israel, if you would only listen to me, you must never have a foreign god. You must not bow before a false god. For it is I, the Lord, your God, who rescued you out of the land of Egypt. Open your mouth wide, and I will fill it with good things. Now put your pens down for just a moment and look up here. Israel's in captivity in Egypt, they had no hope and no future. Their children being born, they weren't trying to decide what college they were going to go to, what university they were going to go to, whether they would be a doctor or a lawyer. Their prayer and their hope was that they would get a good owner, someone who wouldn't beat them every single day. That their life would not be as hard as the life they'd experienced in slavery. God said, I brought you out of it. I brought you out of it. I've given you hope, and I've given you a future. I am your provider. God is our... Throughout your life, a lot of channels are going to flow into your life to fill up your wallet. But none of them are your provider. Dell is not your provider. Samsung is not your provider. Hello? HEB is not your provider. Your provider is God. And every time a check lands in your bank, you thank God. Because He could change the channel tomorrow, but He's still your provider.
That's right. Yes.
You could move from receiving funds, as a teacher to receiving funds as a fireman or a police officer or even as a city worker, but God is your provider.
Yes.
He's the one that takes care of us. And no one can ever take what God provides for you. No one. No one can ever take. Only you can wreck it. Right? Only you can run away from the provision that God has given you. Only you can cast off the things that God is providing into your life. But no one can take the provision from you. God is your source, and He's your provider. Your life calling and your purpose is to be a vocational minister of Jesus Christ. Now, when we lose sight of that in our lives, things go bad. And they go bad in a hurry when we lose sight of what our life calling is all about, our purpose on the earth, why we're supposed to be here. Things start wrecking, and they start going really bad for people. I have seen it over and over in my life. I was thinking this week about several years ago, an email that I received. In fact, something happened that this old email kind of popped up, and I got a chance to read through it, was reminded about it. And I've seen so many like it. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I received one kind of like this. And this is kind of a picture of the train wreck that happens when we don't understand what our life calling is all about. And here was the email that I received. Pastor, I know you've tried over the years to get me to church, but I have not been ready. And now I am ready. Can we talk? I need my wife to come home. I miss her and my children. I know I've made mistakes, but now I'm ready to make a change. Now, over the years, I've seen a lot of these kind of letters, a lot of these kind of emails. And in this story that I'm sharing, this man had been disinterested in his purpose, in his life purpose, in his life calling as a spiritual leader of his own household. And God had had provided for him. He had had encounters and opportunities, one after the other, to understand what God's life calling was for him, to glorify God instead of himself. And he kept pursuing his own desires in his own way. And now he finds that his wife is packed up, moved out, and taken the kids. He had a beautiful, strong, godly wife that was an example to him. I'm telling you, it was unbelievable how she tried to stay in this situation and demonstrate Christ and show Christ's love and do what was necessary to do to help lead her family to God. She brought her 4 children by herself to church every single Sunday and was a living example of a godly woman in front of him. So many people had reached out to him and tried to help him, but it was only in this crisis situation now that things rose to this high level. I remember several occasions that I had had with him, and we had talked over the phone and imploring him that now's the time to make a decision, that you need to fulfill your life calling. God has called you to be a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ. God has called you to glorify him and not yourself. And over again, we would have conversations, and now that his wife and his children were gone, he had decided that it's time to change. And I picked up the phone and I called him, and I remember the conversation going something like this, because he interrupted me pretty early on. He goes, "Pastor," he said, I know what you're saying, it's all right. And he said, you have to make my wife come home, and then I can change. I was like, you have to make her come back, because I'm really ready now. This time, I'm going to do things right. And the sad thing is that opportunity was not coming. She'd been down the road many times, and there had been opportunities for him to make those changes. But life was about him, and she knew the moment that she came back and moved into the household, everything would go back just as it was. It would only be just a short matter of time till that would happen. As I was thinking about this, I was thinking about how we lose everything that's worth living for when we miss our life calling. We lose everything that's worth living for. Life is very hollow when you are living for yourself. I can remember watching several years ago, and they were interviewing just this kind of rock star, movie star guy that was making tons of money making movies, and they asked him the question, are you happy? And he said, I thought I would be. He said, some of my friends are telling me that I just need to get married and that'll make me happy. And there's a hollowness about not having your life calling, and nothing fills that void, nothing. It's the place where Jesus lives, and only he can fill that void. O Israel, if you would only listen to me. So many times over the years, I've felt the pain of God's words there as a pastor and as a minister, watching people and saying, oh, if you only knew what joy there is in serving in your life calling and glorifying God and making him first, putting him as a priority in your life. But all kinds of other things get stuck in those slots along the way in life. I'm going to invite our worship team to come back if they would. Each Sunday in churches across America and around the world, broken people come together. I'm always telling our leaders, our workers, our staff that it's what courage it takes for people to walk through the doors as a first-time guest, a first-time visitor. And a lot of times it's pain that's drove them into the parking lot and through those glass doors and in here. It's the pain of the brokenness of what's going on in their home and in their lives. And in that deep pain, they come pressing in. That's not always the occasion, but many times it is. And so when we come together, there's always that kind of stuff going on. But in all of us, there is brokenness and there is pain. And Jesus is saying, I want to heal that, and I want you to understand what your life calling is, not your vocation, not the things that you're good at and stuff like that. Some of you will probably have major career changes. You'll start out on one path and then wind up on another one. God said, great. I'm all about helping you in that. But it's in those areas that I want to use you the best. Because how does a police officer come to know that Jesus Christ loves him and has committed his life that he might have life? How does a police officer learn about that? Generally, it's another police officer who knows him, who walks the path with him and shares the Jesus that he knows. How does a teacher, an English teacher, come to know that Jesus loves her and has a plan for her life? Generally, it's another English teacher who understands their life calling and shares the good news of Jesus Christ with that English teacher so that she can find Jesus and make him the Lord and the leader of her life. I'm going to ask you to stand with me as the worship team is ready. We're going to sing through this first part of this chorus. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to invite our prayer team, two, if they would, on this side, two underneath the overhang. If you want prayer about the life calling, about God's call on your life to let him shine through your life, then I want you to meet with our prayer team as they come together.